In a room in Delft, sometime around 1665, a young woman turns her head. According to conservation records at the Mauritshuis Museum in The Hague, analyzed through infrared reflectography in 2018, Johannes Vermeer painted this canvas directly, with almost no underdrawing. The ground layer, a warm grey-brown mixture of chalk, lead white, and umber, still shows through in places where the paint film has thinned over 3.5 centuries. Technical imaging reveals he worked wet on wet, blending colors while they remained fluid, a method that demands absolute confidence. This is not fiction. This is what this painting still reveals. What makes a face turn towards you across 400 years? Not beauty alone, though she possesses that. Not technique, though Vermeer's brushwork here reaches a quiet perfection that has never been surpassed. The paradox at the heart of this small canvas, just 17 inches tall, is simpler and stranger. She looks at you as if she knows you, as if she has been waiting in that darkness, in that perfect moment of turning, for you specifically to arrive. Scholars still debate whether she is a portrait or a study in light, a daughter or a servant, a record or a fantasy. The painting refuses to answer. It only continues to turn, to meet your eyes, to hold you in that space between recognition and mystery. It is late now, wherever you are, the kind of hour when the day's noise finally settles, and you can hear yourself think. If you are finding something here in this quiet exploration of a single painting, consider leaving a comment about what draws you to art at night. There is something about these hours that makes old paintings feel newly alive. And if you would like more of these nocturnal journeys through museums and studios, through the hidden lives of images, subscribe and we will walk through more galleries together when the world sleeps. Now, let us step closer to that turning face. You are standing in front of the canvas in the conservation studio of the Mauritshuis. Early morning light, filtering through north-facing windows. The smell is particular, a mixture of distilled spirits used in cleaning tests, the faint mustiness of old varnish, and something else, something like linseed oil that has aged into a glassy hardness over centuries. The painting sits on an easel at eye level, smaller than you expected, intimate. Her face is perhaps 8 inches from forehead to chin. The pearl at her ear catches the studio light, just as it caught the light in Vermeer's studio. A single highlight of lead white so thick you can see the brushstroke's texture from 3 feet away. She wears an exotic costume, a blue and gold turban wrapped in fabric that was already antique when Vermeer painted it, a yellow jacket that scholars believe was a studio prop he used in multiple paintings. Her lips are parted slightly, as if she has just taken a breath to speak or has just finished speaking. The background is pure darkness, not black but a deep greenish-brown mix from earth pigments and bone black applied so smoothly that no brushstroke is visible. She emerges from that darkness as if from deep water, as if she is still surfacing. And then you notice what the conservators noticed in 2018 when they X-rayed the painting as part of the Girl in the Spotlight research project. There is another face beneath this face, faint traces of a different head position, slightly more frontal, less turned. Vermeer changed his mind. He repainted her turning, altered the angle of her gaze by perhaps 5 degrees, enough to transform a study into an encounter. He needed her to be looking back. In 1660s Delft, the world before this painting took its final form, the Dutch Republic was entering the full flowering of its golden age. The city of Delft, home to perhaps 25,000 people, housed a thriving community of artists, most of them members of the Guild of St. Luke, which regulated training, sales, and standards. According to Guild records preserved in the Delft Municipal Archives, Johannes Vermeer was registered as a master painter in December 1653, at the age of 21. He would remain in Delft for his entire life, painting perhaps 45 canvases in total, working slowly, supporting a large family through a combination of art sales, an inherited innkeeping business, and his work as an art dealer. The typical painter's studio in Delft was a working space, ground floor or second floor room with northern light, walls hung with canvases in various stages of completion, tables cluttered with grinding stones for pigments, bottles of oils and varnishes, brushes soaking in containers, ceramic palettes crusted with dried paint. Apprentices, if a painter could afford them, would prepare canvases, grind pigments, mix grounds, perhaps block in backgrounds or drapery under the master's direction. The air would smell of linseed, walnut oil, and the peculiar metallic scent of lead white, the most essential and most poisonous of all pigments. Vermeer's studio, according to archival evidence assembled by art historian John Michael Mauritshuis in his 1989 study, was likely in his house on the Oude Langendijk, in a room on the upper floor. He painted alone. No apprentices are documented. No workshop assistants. Every brushstroke in every painting is his own. This was unusual. Most successful painters ran workshops with multiple hands contributing to finished works. Vermeer's production was smaller, slower, more solitary. His paintings took weeks, sometimes months. He could not have afforded this method if he had relied solely on painting for income. By the early 1660s, Vermeer had developed a distinctive approach to light and space. His interiors glowed with a cool, pearly luminosity, achieved through careful layering of translucent glazes over opaque underlayers. He used expensive pigments, natural ultramarine ground from imported lapis lazuli, lead tin yellow, vermilion, the clearest grades of lake pigments for transparent reds. Paint analyses conducted by the Conservation Department at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, which holds Vermeer's Woman, Holding a Balance, reveal that he often mixed lead white with ultramarine to create the subtle blues that suffuse his interiors. A technically sophisticated choice that maintained color intensity while controlling value. His paintings showed women in domestic interiors, reading letters, playing instruments, pouring milk, weighing gold. The compositions were geometrically precise, built on measured intervals and careful perspective, yet they felt utterly natural, as if you had simply opened a door and found these moments in progress. Critics in Vermeer's lifetime barely noticed him. His reputation was local, but other painters recognized something in his work. Gerard ter Borch, Peter de Hooch. These were the names that resonated in Amsterdam and The Hague. Vermeer remained in Delft, painting for a small circle of patrons who appreciated his meticulous, slow method. Then, around 1665, something shifted. He began painting heads, not portraits in the conventional sense, with identified sitters and formal poses, but studies of faces in exotic costume, faces that looked directly out at the viewer with an unprecedented psychological intensity. Art historian Arthur Wheelock, former curator of Northern Baroque painting at the National Gallery, calls these paintings tronies, a Dutch term for character studies, faces that explore expression and light rather than documenting specific individuals. The girl with the pearl earring belongs to this moment. The commission, if there was one, is undocumented. No contract survives. No letter mentions it. The painting first appears in the historical record in 1696, listed in an auction catalogue after the death of a Delft collector named Jacob Decius, who had inherited most of Vermeer's paintings from his father-in-law, the wealthy printer Peter van Ryven. The catalogue entry describes it simply as a portrait in antique costume. The painting sold for 38 guilders, a respectable sum but not exceptional. What drove Vermeer to paint her? The timing suggests a personal urgency. His household in 1665 included his wife Katharina, his mother-in-law Maria Thins, who provided financial support, and 11 children ranging in age from infancy to their teens. Money was perpetually tight. The art market in Delft was contracting. The Anglo-Dutch War had disrupted trade. Commissions were scarce. A portrait, even a trony, would have required days of work for uncertain financial return. Yet he painted her. He began, according to infrared analysis, with that warm grey ground applied across the entire canvas. He marked out the head position lightly, perhaps with a brush dipped in dilute paint. He worked the background first, that deep shadow, bringing it up to the edge of where her face would be. Then he began to build the face itself. A warm underlayer for the skin, probably a mixture of lead white, vermilion, and yellow ochre. Over this, translucent flesh tones, multiple thin layers allowed to dry between applications. The turban came next, ultramarine mixed with lead white for the blue, lead tin yellow for the gold fabric, each color carefully shaped wet on wet to suggest folds and volume without describing every thread. The pearl earring he painted last, or nearly last. It is too large to be real, too perfectly spherical. Pearls from the oyster are never so symmetrical. This is an ideal pearl, a pearl of light rather than ocean. He placed it with 2 strokes, a grey shadow tone for the body, then a thick touch of pure lead white for the highlight where light strikes the curved surface. That highlight is the brightest point in the entire painting. Your eye goes to it first, before her face, before her eyes. It draws you in, a lure, and then you meet her gaze. Contemporary reactions, to the extent they can be reconstructed, were muted. Vermeer's circle of patrons appreciated the technical mastery, but the broader art world of Amsterdam, Haarlem, and Leiden was preoccupied with other painters, other styles. The fashion was for highly finished surfaces, for narratives drawn from history and mythology, for portraits that announce status and wealth. This girl in her turban offered none of that. She was an image at the edge of genres, too intimate for history painting, too enigmatic for portraiture, too carefully wrought for a casual study. What contemporaries missed, what has emerged only through centuries of looking and through the technical investigations of the last 50 years, is the painting's radical structure. It is built on absence as much as presence. The black background is not merely a foil for the lighted face. It is an active element, a void that suggests infinite depth, that refuses to locate the figure in any specific space or time. According to findings published in 2020 by conservator Abby Vandiver, who led the Girl in the Spotlight project, the background contains no reflected light, no ambient glow from the face. Vermeer painted it dead flat, absorptive. The girl exists against nothing, with nothing, emerging from pure potential into this single moment of turning. The face itself is constructed through a technique called pointillé. Tiny dabs of paint applied with the tip of the brush to suggest texture and catch light. Vermeer used this sparingly in the highlights along the nose, the edge of the cheek, the moisture on the lower lip. Elsewhere the paint is smooth, blended to invisibility. The effect is that the face seems to generate its own light from within, as if she is slightly luminous, as if the pearl at her ear is not reflecting but radiating. No written response from Vermeer survives about this painting or any painting. He left no letters discussing his methods, his intentions, his struggles. The silence is nearly complete. What we know of his inner life must be inferred from the paintings themselves and from the fragmentary documentary record of his circumstances. In 1665, the year most scholars assign to this painting, Vermeer borrowed money. Tax records show increasing debt. A document from 1670 describes him traveling to Amsterdam to sell paintings at lower prices than he wished, driven by necessity. The studio account books, if they ever existed, are lost. But the material evidence in the paintings tells a partial story. The girl with a pearl earring uses expensive pigments, but on a very small canvas, barely larger than a sheet of paper. The support is a fine linen, tightly woven, prepared with care. This suggests economy balanced with quality. He could not afford to waste materials, but neither would he compromise the luminosity he sought. The grinding of ultramarine from lapis lazuli was laborious. A single ounce of the raw stone might yield only a fraction of that weight in usable pigment after grinding, washing, and separating the blue particles from the grey matrix. To use it for a turban, for a costume piece, rather than the robe of the Virgin, was a choice that announced ambition. What was the human cost of this ambition? Letters from Katharina Vermeer, written years later after Johannes died in 1675, describe the household's financial collapse. She petitioned the city council for relief from debts, explaining that her husband had been unable to sell paintings during the economic depression that followed the Dutch war with France. The petition, preserved in the Delft archives, states that he had become so burdened by these difficulties that he fell into a frenzy and died within a day or day and a half. The physician attributed his death to the stress of his debts. The girl with the pearl earring, painted perhaps 10 years before that death, shows no sign of this gathering pressure. She is serene, poised, her turning of the head so graceful it seems effortless. But serenity on canvas is achieved through effort. Each of those luminous flesh tones required mixing, testing, applying, allowing to dry, applying again. The wet-on-wet passages in the turban and jacket demanded that he work quickly, before the paint began to set, then stop and let that section dry, before moving to adjacent areas that might bleed or blur. The gap between the grace of the image and the labor of its making is one dimension of the painting's hidden structure. Another dimension is economic. According to research by art historian Maarten Jan Bock, published in Dutch and Flemish Artists and the Art Market from 1400 to 1700, a portrait in 1660s Delft might sell for anywhere from 20 to 100 guilders, depending on size and the artist's reputation. Vermeer's paintings typically sold in the middle of that range. A canvas this small, without an identified sitter, might have fetched 30 to 40 guilders. But how many weeks did he spend on it? If we assume 2 to 3 weeks of intermittent work, there are effective wage drops below what a skilled craftsman might earn. Vermeer was painting at a loss, subsidized by his dealing business and his wife's family money, pursuing a perfection the market barely valued. The institutional response to Vermeer's work during his lifetime was essentially non-response. The Guild of St. Luke in Delft documented his membership, his service as headman of the guild in 1662 and 1670, his participation in guild affairs, but no official recognition beyond the local followed. No invitation to work for the stadholder's court in The Hague. No major commission from the city government. The mechanisms that might have supported a painter of his caliber, had he been in Rome or Florence, did not exist in the decentralized Dutch art world. Success depended on sales to private collectors, and Vermeer's small output, his refusal to speed production, limited his reach. After his death, the paintings scattered. The 1696 auction in Amsterdam distributed his work among various buyers. The girl with the pearl earring went to an unknown purchaser for those 38 guilders. For the next century and a half, the painting moved through private hands, its location rarely documented. It survived, but invisibly. This is the failure of preservation during the crucial years when provenance chains are established or lost. No museum acquired it. No public collection thought to preserve what scholars now recognize as one of the essential images in Western art. In 1881, a collector named Arnoldus Andries de Tombe bought the painting at an auction in The Hague for 2 guilders and 30 cents. According to auction records, it was listed as a work by an unknown painter, possibly Italian. The pearl earring, the turban, the vaguely Eastern costume had led to misattribution. De Tombe, an amateur with good instincts, suspected it might be a Vermeer. He kept it for the rest of his life, and when he died in 1902, he bequeathed it to the Mauritshuis Museum, along with his other paintings. The museum's initial cataloguing was tentative. Some curators questioned the attribution. The signature that appears on several Vermeer paintings is absent here. The style, while consistent with his work, seemed almost too perfect, too pure. But gradually, as conservation science developed and other Vermeer paintings underwent technical analysis, the evidence became overwhelming. The materials matched, the technique matched, the quality of light was unmistakable. By the mid-20th century, the attribution was secure. Then came the collision between art and war. During the Second World War, the Mauritshuis collection was packed and hidden to protect it from German looting. Paintings were stored in secure locations, moved multiple times as the military situation shifted. The girl with the pearl earring spent years in darkness, in crates, in bunkers. According to the museum's wartime archives, published in a 1995 study, the collection survived intact, but the matsumare, stress of movement and storage, took a toll on many works. Varnish layers yellowed in damp conditions, frames cracked, canvases loosened on their stretchers. After the war, restoration became urgent. In 1960, the Mauritshuis undertook a major conservation campaign. The girl with the pearl earring was cleaned for the first time in decades. Restorers removed layers of discolored varnish that had obscured the painting's clarity. Beneath the yellowed film, the original colors emerged, cooler, brighter, more delicate than anyone alive had seen. The girl's face, which had looked dusky and somber under old varnish, now glowed. The blue of the turban blazed. The pearl seemed to float. But restoration is always interpretation. Each generation of conservators brings different standards, different techniques different assumptions about what a painting should look like. The 1960 cleaning, while successful in removing darkened varnish, also removed some of Vermeer's final glazes, the thinnest layers of transparent color he had applied to modulate tones and unify the composition. This is visible in photographs taken before and after the restoration. The face in the earlier image has more continuous tonal gradation. The face in the cleaned version shows slightly more contrast, a bit more abruptness in the transitions from light to shadow. This is not to say the restoration was wrong, only that it was irreversible. Conservation reports filed in the museum's archives note the problem, but accept it as unavoidable. You cannot clean varnish without risk to what lies beneath. The gap between stated intent to restore the painting's original appearance and actual effect, a subtle alteration of the paint structure Vermeer created, is characteristic of all restoration. We see the painting as it exists now, not as it existed in 1665, and the difference, though small, matters. From the 1970s onward, the painting's public life accelerated. It began to travel to major exhibitions, its image reproduced in books, posters, postcards, eventually digital media. The Girl with a Pearl Earring became one of the most recognized paintings in the world, rivaling the Mona Lisa in fame, if not market value. In 1999, Tracy Chevalier published a historical novel imagining the girl as Vermeer's servant and muse. The novel became an international bestseller. A film adaptation followed in 2003. The painting's enigmatic quality, that turning head and ambiguous gaze, made it fertile ground for storytelling, for fantasies of who she might have been. But every layer of fame also distances us from the object itself. The more people know the image, the less they see the painting. The brushwork that reveals Vermeer's hand becomes invisible behind reproduction. The scale, that crucial smallness that makes her seem like someone you might lean in to whisper with, disappears in enlargement. The painting becomes an icon, a brand, and something essential is lost. The most recent major study, The Girl in Heights, the Spotlight project conducted from 2018 to 2020, attempted to recover the painting as a material object. Conservators used every available imaging technology, macro photography that captured details at microscopic resolution, X-radiography, infrared reflectography, scanning macro XRF that mapped the distribution of chemical elements across the surface. They examined the painting from every angle, in every wavelength, documenting not just what we see, but what lies beneath and between the visible layers. What they found confirmed some assumptions and overturned others. The girl, they determined, was painted in a shorter time than many of Vermeer's interior scenes, perhaps 2 to 3 weeks of intensive work. The background shows no pentimenti, no second thoughts. The face shows that one major change, the repainted turn of the head. The pearl earring, examined at high magnification, resolves into just those 2 brushstrokes, impossibly economical yet completely convincing. Vermeer knew exactly what he was doing. There is no hesitation in the paint handling, no fumbling. This is mastery so complete it becomes invisible. The report's most striking finding concerns the eyes. High-resolution imaging revealed that Vermeer applied the catchlights, those tiny reflections in the pupils that give eyes their living quality, with a single touch of lead white using a brush perhaps 2 hairs wide. The placement is precise to within a fraction of a millimeter. If the catchlight were shifted even slightly, the direction of her gaze would change. she would no longer be looking at you. She would be looking past you, through you, elsewhere. Everything depends on that infinitesimal touch of white. What patterns does this painting establish or reveal? One is the possibility of intimacy without identity. She is no one we can name and everyone we might imagine. The painting asks nothing of her biography because it offers none. What matters is only this: the turn, the gaze, the light. In an art world increasingly dominated by celebrity portraiture and historical narrative, Vermeer created an image that refuses both, that exists in pure present tense. Another pattern is the centrality of technical mastery to emotional effect. The painting moves us not despite its technique, but through it. We feel her presence as real because Vermeer understood how light describes form, how skin reflects and absorbs, how cloth folds, how a pearl catches and concentrates illumination. There is no separation between the how and the what. The painting's power is inseparable from its making. A third pattern, darker and more persistent, is the art world's failure to support genius in real time. Vermeer died in debt, barely known beyond his city, his work undervalued and undersold. The market mechanisms that might have recognized and rewarded his achievement were too diffuse, too dependent on fashion, too unequipped to measure quality against commercial viability. This pattern repeats across centuries. The gap between what we now treasure and what contemporaries actually supported should trouble us. What have we learned? The paintings are not stable objects, but accumulations of time. They carry their making, their history, their migrations, their restorations, their interpretations. The Girl with the Pearl Earring is Vermeer's brushwork from 1665, the 1960 cleaning, the 2018 analysis, the millions of eyes that have met her gaze. All of these layers are real. All of them shape what we see. What have we still not learned? How to value slow work in a fast economy. How to support artists whose vision exceeds their market. How to preserve the conditions that allow someone like Vermeer to spend weeks on a single small canvas, knowing it may not sell, painting anyway because the image demands it. The painting hangs now in the Mauritshuis, in a small room designed specifically for it after a renovation completed in 2014. The lighting is carefully controlled, the temperature and humidity monitored constantly. A sheet of protective glass stands between the viewer and the paint surface. You cannot get within arm's reach. This is necessary for preservation, but something is lost. You cannot see the texture of that pearl highlight, the slight three-dimensionality of the impasto. You cannot see how thin the paint is elsewhere, how the ground shows through. The painting exists behind a barrier, which is also a kind of distance, a kind of silence. Yet she still turns. The engineering of museums, the glass, the guards, the crowd control, none of it prevents the fundamental encounter. When you stand in front of her, when you let the noise of other visitors fall away, when you simply look, she is there. The turning happens, the recognition happens. Across 400 years, across all the accumulations of time and meaning, the image holds. Why does it hold? Not because we know who she was. We do not, and likely never will. Not because the painting teaches a moral or tells a story. It does neither. It holds because Vermeer understood something essential about looking and being looked at, about how a face can bridge distance, about how paint on canvas can become presence. She is still turning, still catching that light, still about to speak or having just fallen silent, still wearing that impossible pearl, still meeting your eyes as if she knows what you came here searching for, even if you do not. The question is not who she was. The question is what it means that she continues to turn, that the image survives its maker, its moment, its market, all the forces that might have destroyed or forgotten it. What it means that we are still here, at this hour, in this darkness, looking back,